I was paying attention to interviews for X-Men 97 because, as you know, there was a particular part of that show that stuck in my craw, so to speak, that was a retcon to the original show that was inspired by a comic book pairing that was already very controversial. Even though X-Men 97 was overall very well received by fans, including this pairing of, Magneto X Rouge was the one thing that seemed universally disliked about the show. You don't have to go far to find criticism for it, or at least criticism in how it was handled, even from the most positive fandom corners of the internet. But I'm not still upset about that. Like, why? Why would you think that I was still upset about that? And from my point of view, I wondered, didn't the creators know people already didn't like this? Didn't they recognize that it was a retcon to the original continuity, and as they were trying to respect that continuity, this wasn't the way to do that? Weren't there other ways to create conflict with the characters? I didn't understand what they were thinking by inserting it into the show. But I find if you pay close enough attention to interviews around the process of creating a show, you'll get your answers. You'll find out what happened behind the scenes and why things were the way they were. You might even find out there were people behind the scenes that did oppose the decision making but were turned down. And I wasn't disappointed when it came to reading these X-Men 97 interviews. I've read 4 people behind the scenes at this point that said that they either hated the Magneto X Rouge stuff when they read the script, or that they knew people weren't going to like it, but the powers that be did it anyway. The most recent interview comes from one of the female directors of the show in a response to Variety asking about the controversial relationship, and she said, "When I first read the script, I was like, Magneto and Rogue? No, I'm a Rogue and Gambit person all the way. What is this? I'm not into this. Savage Land? We can forget about that. Come on. No one wants this." When I got to that episode, I was like, I'm sorry. She was doing what with Magneto in the woods? No, thank you. So she acknowledges that no one wanted this, and it's true. It's a retcon to the original show once again. It's based on a relationship that happened in the comics, but was very polarizing to say the least. I remember when they tried to do Magneto X Rogue back in 2011, 2012, closer to when I got into comics. The only time when they actually did it in mainstream comics, and how much controversy there was then, which is why it had pretty much been abandoned since. And the people behind the scenes who worked on the show acknowledged that people weren't going to like this, so that begs the question,
well, why didn't you do that?
I don't know.
Well, apparently it was a Bo DeMeo thing, the fired showrunner, and none of the executives who worked with him apparently turned him down. Unfortunate to say the least. When talking about media, I want to be clear, there's always a good way that a thing upsets you and a bad way, and there was a lot of upset in X-Men 97 that was upsetting in a good way, but this thing is something that was upsetting in a bad way, in that I felt that it changed characters and was just overall creepy in the way it was handled in ways that I have yet to see people behind the scenes really acknowledge.
That was vile. You owe me big.
But the reason I'm bringing this story up is that it just made me think about a lot of these various kinds of situations in recent years when the creators behind the scenes of shows or movies or whatever it may be openly acknowledge that they know that fans don't want something and that audiences don't want something, but they'll do it anyway. I mean, should creators listen to audiences or not? And what does this discussion have to do with MrBeast? It has everything to do with MrBeast. No. Seriously, it does. It has everything to do with MrBeast. Please stay tuned. But that element I was talking about with X-Men was just a minor element of the show. Let's talk about a broader one, though, when somebody tried to take control of something and make it completely different, contrary to what their audience wanted. Let's talk about Margot Robbie and Harley Quinn. To bring up a behind-the-scenes situation I bet a lot of you were not aware of. Harley is definitely a character that lost her way in her branding over the years, and I think I can confidently say is not nearly as popular as she used to be. This trend we can see going all the way back to the box office flop that was the Birds of Prey movie. A lot of people thought it was strange when Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn got greenlit because it looked so off-brand from what the characters were supposed to be. But did you know that Margot Robbie openly acknowledged that her direction with Harley Quinn in Birds of Prey wasn't what people wanted, but that she did it anyway? In fact, Birds of Prey was created because Margot Robbie didn't like aspects of playing Harley Quinn and wanted to make her into a more palatable character for herself.
I literally pitched this right after going to Comic-Con.
No way.
We were still, well, that's when I started putting the pitch together. I went to Comic-Con, we were halfway through shooting Suicide Squad, and I was definitely taken aback by how much enthusiasm there was for Harley. And I was like, whoa. I was like, I think there's going to be a bit of heat around this character, and if there's this kind of response, then the studio might want me to play her again. And if that's the case, then I'd like it to kind of be on my terms.
In terms of what Margot doesn't like about playing Harley, well, she's been very clear that she has never understood Harley's infatuation with the Joker. In fact, one of the very first interviews I ever read with her was her saying, I just couldn't understand how she could be just such a bad and then go to pieces over some guy. Fans seem to love that about her, that she's in love with someone who treats her terribly. I found that really frustrating, which is a pretty bad look, because Harley's infatuation with the Joker is literally the impetus of her character's existence. It would be like if Robert Pattinson got cast as Batman and on his very first interview said, you know, I love the character of Batman, but just one thing about him bothers me. I've never understood why he's so upset about his parents' death. What's up with that? It doesn't inspire confidence for someone playing a character if they openly state that they don't understand the bare basics of that character. And that's a big point of contention for me, because what I've always said in terms of what people actually want to see from Harley Quinn at a time when a lot of her projects just aren't clicking with the mainstream is I think Harley would actually be popular if they portrayed her with Joker again, because that's actually when she had much better writing and was legitimately widely popular. You can even see that with the bit of hype around Joker too. Regardless of what the movie ends up being, people seem to want to see them together. And some people get very mad when I say that, but guess what? I have an A-list movie star who agrees with me, Margot Robbie.
People really respond to the fact that she loves a madman, which was very confusing to me and I couldn't understand. Thought, okay, everyone's gonna wanna see Harley and Joker, but what I really wanna see is a girl gang film.
So there you have it. Margot Robbie acknowledges in interviews that she knows what fans want with Harley. They're gonna wanna see stuff with her and the Joker be explored, but she says that she didn't want that, and watch how she catches herself in this interview.
I'd like it to kind of be on my terms. I don't wanna be put, I don't, but I also don't want her. I don't want the character put in a situation that doesn't really behoove her.
Yeah, I think exploring the most crucial relationship to Harley's backstory would behoove the character just fine. This is about what Margot Robbie wants. So Margot openly stated in these interviews, even though it didn't get a lot of traction at the time, that Birds of Prey wasn't what people wanted. She wanted it. She wanted to take the character in this direction, even though she acknowledged people wanted something different, and they went forward with it. And people wonder why I think Margot Robbie was a bad choice for Harley Quinn. But I'm not salty about it. Not salty about it at all. I'm just gonna drink my hot chocolate. It's made of wax. There's a cookie in it and chocolate. You can't take a character that millions of people already like and completely change it just for your own taste. I think Margot Robbie is perfectly capable as performing as the character. The problem is she didn't understand fundamental things about her, but she actively tried to change this $1 million character with a couple decades spanning fan base, all to suit her own interests. It reminds me of what Jennifer Lawrence did with the character of Mystique. Mystique is one of the most diabolical, messed up, twisted, evil characters from the comics. This was her response to the fact that she tried to throw her own baby son over a waterfall when it was convenient. She tries to walk it back later, the character, I mean, but I've made my point. Mystique is just evil, but when Jennifer Lawrence got a hold of the character, she didn't want to be the evil one. She wanted to be the hero. She thought that that would look good for her career. Thus, Mystique had to become the greatest, most important, inspirational figure in the X-Men universe, whom everyone is in love with and talks highly of. The most important hero ever.
She is unique.
Yeah, she is, Hank.
If you are an actor and you don't like the character you've been given or major aspects of that character, you just shouldn't be playing them. Not go against the audience of that character and change them for yourself. It doesn't work. I have to wonder what went down in the WB pitch meeting for Birds of Prey though. Hey, I have an idea for this movie. Okay, what is it? Let's take this very successful character and change everything about her and do a movie like that. Okay, does the fan base want that? No, they want Harley with Joker. Oh, well, do audiences want that? No, but I want it. Okay, is there an audience for this movie? Literally no one wants this movie but me. Great, sounds good. Here's $100 million. I mean, I think that maybe part of Margot Robbie's mentality in this case was that maybe she was going to create a new fan base for her version of Harley, but once again, that doesn't work. Anybody who's watched YouTube or has been on YouTube know how it happens. When a creator builds up an audience or has an audience for a certain kind of thing, and then they decide that they don't like that thing anymore, or they don't like their audience anymore, and they try to completely change change their channel, their channel tanks because their audience didn't come for a completely different kind of content. You can't burn down your audience and start something new. You can't fight your audience. I don't really understand what studios are thinking these days, spending millions of dollars on projects that people behind the scenes openly acknowledge there isn't an audience for. I wonder if it's ever been considered these days at WB when thinking about how they're going to use Harley Quinn. The fact that independent Harley in a bird outfit didn't work and that Margot Robbie herself acknowledged it's not what people wanted before the movie came out. Word to the wise, you can't fight your audience. You're not only just going to disappoint and upset your audience, but by the same token, you are also unlikely to profit from it much yourself. You can't fight the audience. And that brings us to Star Wars. Yes, Star Wars. Which has been the hot topic of a lot of conversation for weeks now because of The Acolyte, obviously, with some of the most heated discussions I've seen since The Last Jedi. And people are screaming at each other about Star Wars all over again, and screaming at the people who made the show. Screaming and screaming and screaming and screaming because the show breaks so much of the Star Wars lore and does so many controversial things and is just a badly made show altogether. But the thing is, I can't help but feel that a lot of it was intentional. Do you get that feeling too? Because at this point, the people behind the scenes at Lucasfilm had to have known something like The Acolyte with the space witches who actually know how to use the Force and the demonization of the Jedi and everything else that comes with it was going to upset fans, yet they did it anyway. It gives me the impression like the show was made with the intention of riling people up, and I mean the attitude of taking Star Wars in a direction that is going to deliberately upset fans has been happening since The Last Jedi, and people behind the scenes have been open about it.
I would be worried if everybody across the board was like, yeah, that was a good movie. It's much more exciting to me when you get, a group of people who are like coming up to you and really, really excited about it. And then there are other people who walk out literally saying it was the worst movie I've ever seen. Having those two extremes to me is the mark of the type of movie that I want to make.
I really don't get that mentality though. Like, why would you want your fan base to be divided? If I'm working in art and creation as a business like I am, I want my work to appeal to as many people as possible. So if they like my work, they'll be more likely to pay to see it again or pay to see another work that I do. That's how business works. Why would someone want to divide their audience and intentionally make people unhappy with their work so that it is not profitable or successful in the future? With Star Wars, this is a big one because there's so many infamous clips about people recalling how they confronted Rian Johnson over his plans for The Last Jedi, how they didn't think his vision was going to work, how in Mark Hamill's case, he knew a lot of people were going to be devastated by it, and they were.
I said to Ryan, I'm so surprised how you see Luke. I was shocked because I said to Ryan, number one, Luke was the most optimistic, hopeful character, and now he's this miserable, despondent hermit.
But the answers, it seems, were always the same, and they were the same as every situation I've covered during these videos. One guy wanted to do something, and no one could tell them no, and the executives who hired Rian Johnson and had the power over him didn't do their job in telling him no, and look where that's led. Why do people think like this exactly, though, that they intentionally want to divide their audiences or do the exact thing that they know is going to make people upset? Because let me tell you, I hear a lot of discussion from like film students and critics and stuff, and there's almost this idea that going against the audience and doing things intentionally to upset the audience is art in and of itself. But why do people think like this? I think a lot of it boils down to ego in terms of both Margot Robbie and Rian Johnson's cases, at least. Margot, I don't think, had any sort of malicious intent or anything towards the fans of the OG version of Harley Quinn. It just seems like she had her own career and interest in minds and no one else's. No one could tell her no. Rian Johnson, on the other hand, seems like he reveled in the power that he had. The fact that he had this much control over a property millions of people were emotionally invested in, and therefore millions of people's emotions, and that he could have so many polarizing, strong reactions over to something like that. It comes back to narcissism, honestly. The idea of how decisions made for The Last Jedi were negative, or how they might negatively affect the fans of said property, or even just damage a lucrative brand that was very profitable to a company, mattered nothing to a man like Rian Johnson. All that mattered was getting a reaction out of people. But even beyond the idea of narcissism from creators who do this, I think there's also just a strange antagonism that's come about recently that some people behind the scenes in entertainment seem to have for the audience.
When I heard this new version of Judy Judy Jetson wouldn't be boy crazy, the only word I had to describe my disgust is jinkies. If there is one thing the internet agrees on, it's that you should never change anything ever. I hope you die.
I don't know why people get into the mentality that audience isn't king and that an artist should be able to do whatever they want. And if the audience don't like it, then they can just blow off or whatever. And that mentality is just really confusing to me. When I make something, I want people to be happy with it. If I was, for example, making an X-Men movie, my attitude writing it would be first to make sure that it was the best structure it could be, and second to go, oh, you know, my attitude should be, fans are gonna love this. They're gonna love this part. They're gonna think this is really funny. As a person, it would make me happy to make other people happy, giving them something to be excited about, something positive to think about, where the heartbreak and upset that come with that story are in positive ways, not negative ways. And as a business person where the art I make is the way I make my money, of course I want people to like what I do. So if someone really likes what I'm doing, they'll come and see it again so I can make money off of that and pay my bills. Because I've built up a reputation with people. I make good stuff that they like, so they're gonna want more of it. I don't understand why, as a person who's working in the business of art, you would go, oh, you know what? I want people to walk away from my movie disappointed and angry. Why? Because you don't want people to ever come back and view your work again? You just want to make people angry and miserable? Then there comes in the great debate that I've been hearing for years now, that you shouldn't listen to your audience, that listening or considering your audience is nothing more than pandering, except it's not. By dictionary definition, pandering means to indulge people in a bad desire. So, for example, if you listen to a fringe group of shippers that really wanted a ship to happen even though it didn't make sense for the story, and you went all in tilt for the disgusting fan service of that ship, then that would be pandering. But respecting that there's a lot of people out there who love a story or character and want to preserve that is not pandering in the least. Because all of the examples I've given in this video aren't cases where a risk was simply taken or something didn't turn out the way people expected. They were all situations where the writing and ideas were actively bad and moved things away from their identity and why they were popular in the first place. And that's why audiences reacted the way they did. Audiences aren't always the villains, you know. Sometimes they dislike things for good reasons. Sometimes fans will have bad ideas for the story, and sometimes they will have good ideas. Sometimes creators will have good and bad ideas for a story. Ultimately, a writer should strive not to pander to an audience, but also they shouldn't pander to their own bad drives. They should strive to do what is best for the story. And guess what? What is best for the story always involves if the story is consistent within itself and its characters, if things are built up and developed properly and make sense. When you do that, ultimately your audience will be happy, even if it's not exactly what they expected. That doesn't include retconning in bad storylines or ships or rewriting pre-established characters just to fit your own taste or intentionally messing things up just to make people mad. And now we can finally answer the question of what I'm talking about has to do with MrBeast. Well, in order to grow my channel, I've been watching interviews from the greats on YouTube, you know, the people who've actually made it big, who know what they're doing, and I was listening to interviews with MrBeast and his process, and I noticed how he always talks about what the audience wants, and how he used to blame the algorithm for his videos not picking up until he realized the problem was his videos were terrible.
It is, and the thing is though, you know, with the videos I was making when I was a smaller creator, I genuinely felt like, you know, the algorithm hates me or this is unfair. But I just wasn't making content that deserved to get views. I don't know a nice way to put it. So I'm glad I'm talking about myself. The videos sucked. Like, I mean, you just look at the retention graphs. People would click off at the beginning. People didn't know sometimes what they're clicking on. And like, if I wasn't retaining a viewer, just why would it make sense for you to promote it?
He talks about how he considered what people actually wanted to watch. He talks about his strategy of making what would seem to be a clickbait title and not only actually meeting that clickbait, but going above and beyond people's expectations.
Match the expectations, and then you want to exceed them. So you want to assure people that what they clicked on is what they're getting, and then blow their mind and be like, but you're also getting even more.
And look at the guy. He is massively, massively, massively successul. And I'm like, I never hear that kind of talk from people in the movie industry these days. It's always, let's do the thing that's going to make the audience most mad. Or I know people want this, but I'm going to do this instead. And if the audience doesn't like it, that's their fault. Why don't I ever hear a head writer or producer or someone in Hollywood go, I know people want this, so let's meet them there and go beyond expectations and give them something even better. It's never that. It's always, I know people are going to probably hate this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And it's no wonder YouTubers are so successful these days and connected with their audience, but Hollywood is struggling. The top YouTubers care about their audience. They have to. But so much of Hollywood is actively fighting against the audience. But in the words of Yoda,
that is why you fail.
We hear so much talk of toxic fandom today, and that fans are just becoming more and more toxic and entitled to these properties, and that is the real problem. But I think the opposite is true. I think what's actually happening is we're seeing an epidemic of writers and creators who are put in these positions of power who deliberately do things to antagonize their audience. It might sound conspiratorial or crazy, but there's quite literally evidence for it. And I see a lot of film students and people like that try to defend that mentality because they want to do whatever they want, but I want to tell them, no, you can't make whatever you want and be successful. You are at the mercy of your audience. If you don't care about what the audience wants, then you shouldn't be working in the business, because look at the rate of failure when you don't care about your audience. Now, what needs to happen or change behind the scenes is we need to have people who have the courage to say no. Look at something like The Last Jedi or Birds of Prey or that stupid Agneto stuff and say, no, no one wants this. No one likes this but you. This is going to lead to disaster. We're not going to spend millions of dollars on this when we know it's just going to wreck people's enjoyment. And to the people who would blame fans for how they feel about this kind of stuff and laugh at us, I would say, art is meant to take someone's emotions in play. It's meant to create strong emotional reactions from people. And yes, people do have a responsibility to what they do with the emotions that they get from art. But at the same time, an artist has a responsibility for what they put in their art. Yes, people are going to make mistakes, and there's always going to be things out there that are disappointing. But I think when you actively recognize that something is going to be volatile to the audience, maybe you shouldn't do it. And maybe if we had more of that, then we would have more positive conversation around these artistic endeavors and in fandoms and more successful projects today. That's all I got for you guys today. Thank you, patrons. Please support me on Patreon and subscribe. See you next time.